if you have to pick a guy to kind of sit based off performance, Chapman. And, he's going to say all the right things. I can't imagine he's thrilled necessarily to be taking a day off. I don't think it's going to be like we're going to be seeing him sitting multiple times a week. It's one of those wait-and-see things. Like if Eldridge starts swinging the bat well, Schmidt swinging the bat well, Chapman isn't, maybe we see a little more as far as off days for Chapman.
Hey, Justice, what's going on? Thanks for coming on, man.
Doing well, yeah. Doing well. Appreciate it for having me. Just had some dim sum. It's like 70 degrees. Couple scattered clouds. Can't complain.
I love it. Love it. Perfect. Yeah, you're in a good setting, especially when the Giants are coming off of one of their better performances of the year. But this one's interesting from the pitching perspective. Look, if Chapman and other veterans are playing for playing time, is Adrian Hauser also? How long is the leash right now for him?
I mean, it's a little tough. Like, I understand where you're coming from because Trevor McDonald has been having some good starts in the time that he's been up here. I do think that the Giants are going to exercise some patience with him because he did sign the 2-year, $22 million deal with that club option for 2028. But I did kind of go back to last year just as a point of reference. Jordan Hicks had the great start to start the year. I think he kind of got an 8-start leash where things weren't going well. And then at that point, they had Hayden Birdsong and went to him there. But Hauser's coming off of his best start of the year, 6+ innings, allowed 2 runs, one of which was earned. I personally thought he could have gone a little longer in that game as well. I wouldn't have been shocked if he could have completed 7 innings. But, he's coming off of his best start of the year. This is obviously a very big task for him against the reigning back-to-back champs. And if he pitches well tonight, I think he's, at the minimum, kind of kicks that can down the road for a little bit.
Yeah, and you also have the Logan Webb situation where he's on the IL. When do you think that he is going to be able to come off? When's he eligible to even come off?
I think he went on I think he is retroactive to May 6th. So if you do the math and you incorporate one of the off days into it, I think it might be it's at the minimum going to be 2 starts. I think that might be what he's aiming for. Webb said that he thinks this is going to be a minimum stint. So, that would kind of equate to 2, maybe 3 missed starts. And it's really going to depend. I don't know if they're going to have him do a rehab assignment. I don't think they are. Nothing's been said on that note. But Webb, we was pretty confident in saying that this was going to be a minimum 15-day stint for him.
Justice, who is the closer for this team?
That is a great question. Because last night before, the Giants scored 3 runs or whatever it was in the top of the 9th inning, Caleb Killian was warming up to protect a 3-run lead. Obviously, Ryan Walker was optioned. Eric Miller is currently rehabbing. So there isn't a very clear closer right now. It kind of was already closer by committee in a sense, but, it's starting the year. But, you had Walker and Miller, and those were 2 guys where you can kind of mix and match. Now it feels pretty open-ended. I think, Caleb Killian has gotten a couple opportunities. He reported his first career save. It was either a week ago or 2 weeks ago. Had the outing against the Pittsburgh Pirates. I think it was last Friday where it got a little dicey. I think Killian might be the closest thing this team has to a closer right now. I think he'll at least get those opportunities. The stuff is nasty, but, he doesn't have the high leverage experience, so it's going to be a little bit of trial by fire here for whether it's Killian or whoever that they have in the bullpen.
Yeah, and it's going to have to be a situation where you get a lead late and you go out there and try to find out if somebody can actually win the job. And all eyes today, though, on Bryce Eldridge, who gets in there and he gets to start and face Yamamoto. What do you think is going to be the fallout short-term or even longer-term of Matt Chapman again getting a day off that he probably isn't thrilled about?
Yeah, I go back to last Monday when Bryce and Jesus Rodriguez were initially both called up, and it was Chapman that sat out so Casey Schmidt could be at third base in order to get Bryce in the lineup. And we talked to Chapman about this. It was after one of the games this past weekend, and he was asked, hey, in order to get Bryce and these guys in the lineup, one of these more veteran guys is probably going to have to sit. And Adames is starting to find himself offensively. Rafael Devers has the 5th highest OPS in the month of May, and Casey Schmidt's been swinging the bat well all season. So, if you have to pick a guy to kind of sit based off performance, Chapman. And, he's going to say all the right things. I can't imagine he's thrilled necessarily to be taking a day off, but none of these guys can. These are guys that want to be in here every day, and I think Chapman understands that, there is a 6'7" first baseman capable of doing some damage, and, if he's not swinging the bat, they've got guys that are swinging the bat, and, it's kind of just going to be, it is what it is right now. If Chapman wants to be in there every day, it's just going to come down to performance. And I don't think it's going to be we're going to be seeing him sitting multiple times a week, but it's one of those wait and see things. Like if Eldridge starts swinging the bat well, Schmidt's swinging the bat well, Chapman isn't, maybe we see a little more as far as off days for Chapman.
Justice, I think that everybody, at least I am, scratching head a little bit with regard to why Bryce Eldridge is up. You've got this logjam. The press availability for Tony Vitello yesterday where he consistently says, yeah, he's pretty much most of the time going to come off the bench. Yet in the next sentence, it's like anything for Bryce's development. I'm having a hard time figuring out why the Giants called him up. Why do you think they called him up?
Yeah, when we asked Buster Posey about that, the rationale was they wanted to jumpstart the offense, which is a fair one to make because, remember that they were coming off being swept both in Philadelphia and Tampa. At the time of the call-up, the offense was last in runs, last in homers, last in walks, last in steals, 29th in OPS, whatever the numbers were. So that was kind of the rationale of jumpstarting the offense. And kind of in fairness, the Giants offense has looked a lot better since Eldridge and Rodriguez have been up. I think they've scored at least 5 runs in 4 of their last 8 games, whereas like the first 34 games or whatever it was, they barely scratched that at all. I think it's like 10 times in the first 34. So it was they were called up, both Rodriguez and Eldridge, in order to jumpstart the offense. Now, but the point that you're making, it is, it's not perfect. It's, and that's kind of a function of the roster. I don't necessarily put this on Vitello because it's a tough spot to put him in because you've got a lot of very well-compensated guys around this infield. You also have, a veteran, Luis Arias, who's hitting well. You have Casey Schmidt, who's hitting well. There's really not, a clear and defined place that they could put him, barring, an injury or a trade. And I think, it's funny. I was thinking about this last night. I actually wrote this morning. Like, if Buster Posey wanted to make his own, like, Benji Molina trade, that would be trading Luis Arias and you put Schmidt at second base, and that kind of frees everything else up. I don't think they would necessarily want to do that right now because they're trying to find any offense they could. But depending on how the ebbs and flow of this season go, like maybe that's something that gets entertained, especially because Luis is on a 1-year deal. But like you mentioned, it's not perfect. For a 21-year-old to kind of be in this quasi, maybe an everyday player in the sense that he gets like a pinch hit appearance, but not a starter. So it's not perfect. And, Bryce said he's not concerned, or Vitello said he's not concerned about the development. But, just objectively speaking, it's a lot more difficult to learn Major League pitching when you're not consistently facing Major League pitching.
Yeah, and it's a lot more difficult for Matt Chapman to break out of his slump if he's not actually in the batter's box trying to break out of his slump. Casey Schmidt to right field, is this something that we're all just kind of making up? Or are they, in your opinion, making a concerted effort to try to get him up to speed?
Oh, he's worked out there. He's had a couple days, pregame that he spent some time in right field. I do think it might be a little easier to move Elliott to right and move Schmidt to left. You can kind of hide guys in left foot, Oracle Park. Between the 24-foot wall, the bricks, all the angles, it's not the easiest one to learn. I think that'd probably make a little more sense if they were going to do that. But it is something they're at least entertaining. And, we don't necessarily consider Schmidt as like a burner necessarily, but you watch him run the bases. He's very fast. He's very athletic. And I think it's something that he could acclimate to. Like, go back to last year. He had never played first base as a professional, like not in the minors, not in the majors, never. And then they throw him out there in first base, and Houston's like, oh, well, I guess Casey Schmidt can play first base. And yeah, there was, the thing with Chapman earlier this year, but that's just the inexperience. But, if you talk about defensive versatility, it's Casey Schmidt and Jesus Rodriguez. If both of them are capable of doing a lot of different things, and maybe that's what it comes down to. Right now, Jung Ho's swinging a hot bat, Elliott's swinging a hot bat, so there's not necessarily like the easiest. There's going to have to be some creativity here. Like maybe if Bader continues to struggle, maybe you entertain the idea of Jung Ho to center and then maybe occasionally Schmidt and right. I think they do want to keep Bader in center for defensive purposes. But to go back to the original question, I would not be shocked if we see Schmidt out there at some point. Now, is it going to be every day? Probably not. But maybe once in a while, wouldn't be shocked.
Justice, let's go back to Jung Ho Lee for a second and expand a little bit, on would they be willing to move him back to center? And then I'd love to hear a broader answer. He was not a buster signing. And, he hasn't been bad this year, but it's also, I don't know, it just looks kind of average to me. What do you think the overall organizational stance is on Jung Ho Lee right now?
As far as moving into center, they did sign Harrison Bader to the 2-year, $20.5 million deal. I think that they're going to kind of, not exactly a one-to-one with Hauser, but, when you sign a guy to a multi-year deal, you're going to allow him that opportunity. Jung Ho Lee didn't rate out well as a defender in center field last year. Not necessarily the worst eye test in the world, but when you kind of look at the metrics and you look at some of the jumps, it's like maybe this wasn't our best option. So that was, a lot was made about that, and I think we'll see Harrison Bader continue to be in center field as of right now. As far as the organizational outlook, it's been, we've gotten, I think, more than a full season's worth of games. At this point, there's been some good, there's been some bad. I think, it was a rough start to the season, but he's really picked it up offensively. I do think that, this move to right field is going to make him a more valuable player in the long run. But, we're kind of getting a sense of who he is as a player. On days where a right-hander's on the mound, we might see him we're probably going to see him in that leadoff spot. On days where there's a lefty on the mound, we're probably going to see him lower in the lineup, if not, have another bat in the lineup entirely. He's not great against lefties. But, he's been a solid defender over there in right field. It's looked good. The results of this season have been solid. Maybe he's not, he hasn't so far been that guy that they signed to the $113 million deal, but he has been a very solid player in this offense. And, again, it kind of goes back. I hate to say everything goes back to, Rafael Devers and Willie Adames and Matt Chapman, but a lot of this team's issues can be solved if those guys start hitting like they're capable. And we saw it yesterday with Devers. He works this great at bat against Sasaki, hits his fifth homer. He's heating up, Adames heating up. And you see, the wins are starting to come. That's no accident that as they go, the offense starts to go, or the team starts to go, rather.